Anita, I think you can show that all council members are present. And before we get on, I want to also recognize our Youth Advisory Council, which is in the back, made up of young people from all of our high schools. They're on summer break and they're still taking part in what's going on in our city. So y'all stand up, we can recognize you all. And I missed you. We have now two former council members here, Councilmember Wallace and Dr. Foote was in the back as well. So thank you all for being here. And Ben Monroe. Y'all gotta give me a list. I can't do all. All right, item 5 is approval of the minutes from the June 4th, 2019 City Council meeting. There are no additions or corrections to the minutes. We'll approve those as read. Item 6, we don't have any proclamations today, this time. Item 7 is invitation for public comment. If you have a comment on any item on first reading, you can raise your hand and be recognized. You can come up and address the council. Item 8, first reading, is consideration of an ordinance to close and abandon a portion of Jen Street between Young Street and the west margin of NS and Railroad.
Good morning, Mayor and Council.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You have the materials pertinent to this request. As you can see on the map, if I get that up there for me. All right. This portion of Jen Street is the only portion that basically exists on this side of the railroad track. You can see the red on the map. That was an area that was closed in 2003. So there's only one property owner that owns properties on both sides. So he asked that we close that, and we presented that to the Planning Commission, and they have recommended approval of it to you.
Any questions from council? All right, before we have a motion, this is an item on first reading. I will open the public comment. See anybody has a public comment, raise your hand, be recognized. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. And do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? Council, please vote.
And the vote is unanimous.
Item 2 under first reading is consideration of an ordinance to close and abandon a portion of an alley that runs between Westwood Avenue, Campbell Street, Prospect Avenue, and North Lake Drive.
Again, you have the materials pertinent to this closure. This falls into a category of alley that we have dealt with many times before council. If you'll remember, we have been on a campaign to abandon those alleys that are unimproved and really don't serve a public interest. And this is one of those. It runs basically through people's yards. It may have been an active alley at one time, but it's kind of become inactive over time. We are keeping a portion of this alley open, as you can see on the west end, on the Campbell Street end of it. We are keeping that open because the property located at 620 has their driveway in that alley. And so if we were to abandon it, half of that driveway would go to the property owners to the north. So to keep them with a viable driveway, we have kept that section open. But the area you see in red will be the portion that will be closed if y'all approve it. And this was presented to the Planning Commission, and they have recommended approval of it to you.
Thanks, Stan. Any questions for Stan? Before we get
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
if I may, Mr. Pallett, was there any opposition?
No, sir, we received no calls.
Okay, thank you.
Before we have a motion, I will open a public hearing. Any of those wishing to speak, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing.
Excuse me,
Oh, sorry.
one Joe.
Yes, didn't see you.
I have a letter right here saying the alley was closed in 1990.
Okay. It was,
We don't-
the alley may have been closed, Stan, you,
And it's stating it turned over to the property owner.
Well, we had no record of that, so by your action, you'll basically just reiterate, I guess, what happened in 90 if they did it in 90. But again, it accomplishes the same goal, I guess.
we'll formalize what happened in 1990.
Can you take a look at it? Have you
And
seen it, Stan?
I will.
Could we invite him up?
Yeah,
And
come
so
on
we
up.
can put him on the record?
Come on up here and have a seat and give us your name for the record, please.
My name is Sidney Cavler. I'm a present owner of 135.
I see that, you know, that they went through the process of talking about it, closing this alley, and I'm not sure, we couldn't find an ordinance, so I don't know what happened, but again, since we couldn't find a record of it, I guess by doing this, we're just restating what we may have done in 90. So,
Formalizing it for the record.
yes.
Yeah, okay,
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
thank you. All right, anyone else?
All right.
My name is Mark Spain, a concerned citizen. Mr. Mayor and the council, I think it would be great at Liberty Gardens at Freedom Plaza that you put a beautiful waterfall right there in the middle in
Mark,
memory of all
Mark,
those.
this is a public hearing on the
Oh.
item on the agenda, so if you want to talk about that, we can talk about that later, but
Okay,
we'll talk
thank you,
about that.
sir.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to close the public hearing. And do we have a motion on the?
So
the
moved.
item? Motion?
Seconded.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Council, please vote.
And the vote is unanimous.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Thank you. We have no second readings. Item 10 is new business. We have, first off, is an election of a vice mayor.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I'd like to nominate Councilman Cisco for a one-year term as vice mayor.
No second.
We have a motion and a second.
I move the nominations be closed.
Second.
Second, all right. All in favor? Council, please vote. Councilman Cisco is our vice mayor. Put you to work this year. All right, Item 2 under new business is election of a treasurer.
Mayor,
Yes,
I'd like to recommend for 4 years, Ross Pretty as our city treasurer.
Second.
motion and a second. Any discussion? Any other nominations?
I move that be closed.
Closed? All right. So council, please vote on Councilman Ross Pretty being treasurer.
And the vote is unanimous with one abstention.
Ross, you do accept, right? All right. Item 3 is reappointment of the city recorder. And I've talked with Mr. Al LaFoon, who has agreed, if reappointed, to stay on as city recorder. And so I would like to ask the council to consider Mr. LaFoon as reappointment for city recorder. Is there-
Second that.
I can't make the motion. A motion for that?
I'll
you
make
make
a motion for that.
Second.
Motion is second. Any discussion? Council, please vote.
And the vote is unanimous.
Item 4 under new business is the appointment of a budget committee. I'd like to thank council for working with me on this process of trying to get the appointments and the resumes. And so you got a list this morning of the budget committee. And they are as follows: Paul Taylor is the council representative, Andrew Long, Mark Johnstone, Ron Tharp, and Doug Roth as the budget committee.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I think it'd be worthwhile to make it known that you have so diligently tried to get 2 more African Americans on that budget committee, but they declined.
Thank
you. I want that to be known.
This is a committee that's gonna be somewhat labor intensive, and so, time commitment is of an issue. So I thank these 5 for agreeing to serve on this committee.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sure, while I'm sure that our council representative will serve diligently, I would just state that we may have missed an opportunity to place a senior member of the council, someone who had served before, on that committee. But We look forward to
we
working
have not
together
voted, so
and
we can
moving
add if
forward.
you would like to add. Is that a volunteer down there?
Yes,
Okay. So add Councilman Brooks to the committee as well.
thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any other discussion? Need a motion?
Move approved.
Second.
Any discussion on the nominations with the inclusion of Councilman Brooks? Council, please vote.
And the vote passes with 8 members in favor, 1 abstaining.
Item 5 under new business is board appointments. I have the appointment of myself to replace Mayor Gist, and Councilmember Marta Wallace to replace Councilman Randy Wallace on the Planning Commission.
Move the approval.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? Council, please vote.
And the motion passes with 8 members in favor, 1 abstaining.
The appointment of the Beer Board, Russ McKelvey, Johnny Dodd, and Gary Pickens to the Beer Board.
So move.
Second.
Any discussion? Council, please vote.
And the vote passes with 7 members voting in favor and 2 abstaining.
Item 6 under new business is follow-up to the resolution from the June 4th, 2019 meeting concerning capital budget funding and refunding. I have Al come up to give us a follow-up on that.
Good morning, Mayor and Council.
Morning.
As usual, we save the worst for last. And as Mayor Conger has stipulated, there was a resolution which you have a copy of in your package, 2019-5, that used the words "encourage the new city council and city staff to pursue various sources for funding the forthcoming capital budget." And as all of you are aware, the former administration was attempting and intending to do a continuation budget, and the state comptroller ruled against that. So I put together a operating budget, which now has been accepted by the state comptroller. And I did that basically on an exception basis. There was no input from the departments. So as we go forward, I've spent like 3 hours yesterday with Councilman Taylor, and we're going to have to address in segments budget amendments to make it a realistic budget. And I appreciate Councilman Taylor's leadership on this budget committee. It's going to be a significant year. I know you members who, former members who are returning, are tired of hearing and seeing my little pie chart. If I can get IT to help me here. Turn the camera so that I can. Here we go. Sometimes a picture's worth 1,000 words. And basically, what Paul and I discussed yesterday and is going to be coming forth, well, I think Mayor Conger issued an email yesterday to his staff, to the department heads, that he wanted them to present their capital needs, not their wants or their wish list. But the whole situation that we're concerned with here is the fact that we are not growing. Our total property tax and tax in lieu of or tax equivalents are not growing at a pace to support our debt service. And this section here, the gray section, continues, well, it's going up a little bit here, but at one time it was 78%, let's say, and 22% over here in debt service. And the debt service keeps expanding, which then shrinks what we can do to support these departments. that made a presentation to you new members last Tuesday and basically told what their responsibilities were and the wonderful things in reality that they're doing with the constrained funds that they operate on. So we cannot allow this section here to continue to decrease. And as Paul and I looked at yesterday, we're facing a situation where we're at, right here, at $9.7 million is our debt service this year. But then you can see we've got 4 years of $10 million in debt service. So for the next 4 years, the section here that supports our public safety, public works, parks and recreation, et cetera, is not gonna grow unless we come up with some new revenues. And if you remember back in November, Piper Jaffray did a study for us, and based on past history and trends, it looks like it looked to them like our revenues would grow at 2%, and our expenses would grow at 3%, and somewhere along the line, we would have a problem. Well, the budget we put together isn't even that good. Our revenues basically are break even or even slightly decreased because of some situations and circumstances that evolved in our property tax with the acquisition of Tenova, which was our third largest taxpayer, and some other actions that were taken by, and rightly so, by West Tennessee Healthcare. But going along with that, we also have decreases in the budget for the operating areas. And this is comparing, by the way, the FY20 budget to the FY18-19 amended budget.
Can you zoom in on those numbers so the council can be able to see it more clear, please? Maybe.
I'm at a loss as to how I zoom in here. Stan can help me, he's the zoomer. Just a little humor here. There we go. Look in. My whole point is, it looks good to say that departments are decreasing in their expenses for FY20, but in all honesty, they have not had the opportunity to submit their budget requests. In some cases, they may have, in FY19, acquired additional employees or moved them from one area to another. So we have a big task in front of us, and as Paul and I discussed, to get a realistic budget. But the emphasis up front is going to be on the capital budget, because we don't have a capital budget and we have not been approved by you, the council, to borrow any monies. Basically, you know, we're facing a situation where we did fortunately decide a year ago to apportion off a funding segment for our road resurfacing. But $1,277,000 is nowhere near what Scott Chandler needs on his road resurfacing. And we can't even start spending that money until we start collecting our taxes in the October through December timeframe. So just because it shows the white segment there that he has $1.3 million, he's been apportioned that, but until we start receiving our tax funds, our tax revenue, those funds really aren't there.
That's correct. Mr. Chairman, if I may, Mr. LaFoon, we also had some left for stormwater. Is that correct?
Stormwater, we basically overspent our budget. I put another $245,000 in this year's budget. But Scott, I mean, you can address that. I don't think we have any monies left.
And I had kind of just talked to Paul outside a while ago. all of our stormwater funding is being done out of operations. So if you talk debt service and talking capital funding, we have not been doing stormwater projects out of capital. Now, that's a discussion that we may want to have, projects of a certain size being out of capital. But currently, the stormwater department is a public works department that I'm responsible for, and that budget has a construction crew, and the monies that are put in the building materials line items are the monies that we use to purchase the materials, and then we install the stormwater structures and pipes ourselves. So I don't know if that answers your question, but there's no capital funding that'll bring into the new year, but the operational funding will still be there as it was funded last year. And so we'll be able to do an equitable amount of projects that we did the previous year out of those funds.
So
Thank
Scott,
you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Also, it appears that we're gonna need a capital outlay budget soon and very soon. And are we, the process, are we going through the budget committee first?
That
or-
is what the budget committee is first gonna be tasked with,
Okay.
and that's why I've asked the department heads to provide their needs list by next Friday.
Okay,
And they'll be tasked with developing a capital outlay budget and also looking at the refunding options that we have for our 2009 debt.
very good. I have one more observation, not an observation, a thought that I've had for a couple of years now. And I'm saying it to the mayor, to the council, and to the revenue staff of the city. I think it's time to have a professional to do write for grants, a professional grant writer on retainer, whether it be for federal grants, state grants, local grants. Talk with each department head. I think this will help us.
That is in the works right now.
Thank you so much.
I had a question, Scott, you left too quick. Sorry. So you were saying that stormwater projects aren't from the capital budget? You don't submit a capital budget for the stormwater projects?
Right. Traditionally, what we've done is requested for equipment type purchases under stormwater capital in order to give the construction workers the tools that they need to actually do the projects. So we have not submitted projects on the capital side. So we have a pretty hefty operating budget that Al has funded when he passed the operating budget. So those monies today started a new year that we can do the same number of projects or similar amount of money of projects as we did last year, but it's through operations, so you won't see that currently submitted as a capital
I see.
expense.
I would just suggest that as we move forward, and I think Allied asked the question during our budget hearings, we do have that section that is the white that is set aside for capital projects for us to consider with what we know about our infrastructure and stormwater issues is to move monies into that capital going forward, because surely we know that we're going to have to address some of those issues very quickly.
You have a good point, and Scott coincidentally was just discussing that with me as we sat back there and chatted, so we'll take that into consideration.
Yeah, to me, we want to make sure that y'all understand, you know, the funding of the way we've been doing it. If you ask me to submit a capital and I go based on what we've been doing, I wouldn't submit a stormwater project on
Right.
capital. But it may be the council's wishes too of a certain size project to include those in a list, because you're not planning on doing those out of the operational budget. So that's a discussion we need to have.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And council, what I've asked the engineer to do is we're going through and using our GIS systems to overlay capital needs for our street resurfacing, and we're gonna start analyzing and prioritizing the list of our stormwater, because we really don't know to what extent and where our priorities are, so we're gonna start doing that as well.
But we do know that it's an issue.
We know it's
that
an
we've
issue, we
got.
just don't know where and don't know where to start and what's the worst issue.
Absolutely.
Okay, in your packet, proceeding from the resolution 2009 19-5, I was asked to go out and pursue available borrowing rates, and this is by no means the only options that we have, but I took the liberty of going back to Tennessee Municipal Bond Fund, since they're the facility that we have used in our last 2 or 3 fundings, and asked for their fixed rate program, an explanation. So here it says that the fixed rate program can be locked in for 10 or 15 years. Of course, if you lock it in for a longer period of time, then the rate increases. We looked at a 20-year amortization, which is what we've been doing. Their total cost of issuance is 60 basis points. Their form of loaning monies is on a draw basis. In other words, we wouldn't draw down the 4 or 5 million right away. For example, the 9 million that we borrowed 2 years ago, it took me 2 years to draw those funds down, which is to our advantage because we don't pay interest on the monies until we do draw them down. So this is by no means the only option that we're going to be looking at, but if you flip over a couple of pages, you will see an amortization schedule based on just simply a what if we borrowed 5 million. We may borrow nowhere near 5 million. What we have to really look at is this year we're paying down 7.5 million in principal out of that 9.7 million that I showed you previously as our debt service. So we surely want to borrow less than we're paying down. I mean, you can see that in your own finances. You don't want to increase the amount of debt service. So I just used 5 million as a rough number, and you can see at a 3.51% over a period of time, that would cost us a total of $7,180,000, including principal and interest. And that's locking in the rate for 10 years. If we locked it in for 15 years, we would have to pay a 3.68%, which obviously makes sense. The further you lock it in, the more you reduce your risk, the higher interest rates you're going to have to pay. And there, it would be a total cost over the 20 years of $7,293,000 versus the $7,180,376. So those are the type of decisions that we'll have to look at, and we may not decide to do this fixed rate type of borrowing. Paul is going to be chairing our budget committee, and we'll be looking at all options.
And you will be going out and looking at additional options
Yes,
beyond this as well?
until you return in your absence, I will be doing that.
Sure.
Yes. And of course, Mayor Conger has asked for the departments to submit their needs, their capital needs by the 12th, I believe. Is that right? Yes. And Paul sent me an email yesterday, and I'm going to try and just forward that to the departments, if you don't mind.
That's fine.
Stating that we'll no longer say that just because a department wants a new truck, that is a need. You're gonna have to basically, I'm speaking to the department heads for Paul and myself, you're gonna have to say, here's my whole fleet of vehicles, and 30% of them are 10 years old, and you're gonna have to have some justification, either age, mileage, and going even further into that, does it correspond with a long-term capital program for each department?
Yes.
Paul,
so-
is there anything else you want to say?
Yeah, a description. Is there a capital asset management plan in place within that department? How does that capital impact operational expenses? So those are the things that we're gonna be looking at as we move forward and making decisions on whether to purchase new equipment or other capital projects.
Right. I think it'll be a benefit to all of us, including the department heads, to really put something down like that in writing. looking at a more optimistic option we have on the, that's summary I showed you before, there are 3 loans that we can refund. You can refund every 10 years. And these are from basically 2009 and 2011. You can do what is called a refunding when the interest rates are right, when they're lower than what the current debt service is funded at. And this is from Piper Jaffray, and it will have to be scrubbed and compared with other submissions. But we have a net present value savings here of $1,819,000, which spread over 5 years, you know, would be 300 and some odd thousand dollars a year savings. So whether that number is $1,000,008 or $1,000,005 or whatever we end up with, depending upon the movement of interest rates, we certainly want to look at this because it's a great opportunity to reduce our debt service each year.
Yeah, and I think it's important for the council to note that as well as the moving interest rates upon the refund, upon the date of refund, there will also be an estimated administrative fee that we'll need to account for that could
Yes.
come out of this bottom line number.
That is basically what I wanted to present. We're not voting on anything. I'm not trying to be the bearer of bad news, but as Mayor Conger and Paul and I have discussed, we've got to come to a realization that the things we need to do to provide city services and public service, public works, parks and recreation, et cetera, come at a price. And we need to get that on the table and address, because all of you are hopefully going to be here for 4 years at least, if not more, a long-term plan. Thank you, Mayor.
Very good. Mayor, if I may, Mr. LaFone, and help me, Mr. Chairman. In a nutshell, we need to tighten up our rope and find some funding streams. Is that correct?
Yes, very true.
All right. So
When you
it's gonna
say
be,
tighten our rope, you mean be more responsible as far as what we spend.
that is correct.
Right.
Councilman Dunn.
And find some new funding streams.
Yeah, if we stayed in the meeting the other day, if we can look at some leasing, some cars and vehicles, the leasing programs, it might help out also.
But a capital lease, not to kill your idea there, it could be very beneficial, but ATA, our auditors, and the state comptrollers look at a capital lease as long-term debt. So if we borrowed $5 million and went out and leased $2 million for other vehicles or whatever, our debt would go up $7 million by the way the state comptroller looks at it. I'm not trying to kill the idea of leasing, because it may be beneficial, as Paul and I discussed.
Yeah, I think there's a potential, there's pros and cons to leasing and the amount and how that impacts the debt number as well. So we'll analyze that per project.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, we're looking forward to the Budget Committee recommendations, and we're anxiously waiting so we can get some things done.
Thank you, Councilman. Any other questions for Al? Thank you, Al.
Okay.
Item 7 are new business. I don't know how we're gonna do this with Councilman Bray not here.
I'm gonna take up in this,
Okay.
I'll take up in this honor.
Consideration of invoices over $10,000.
But before I make that motion, I would like for y'all to continue to pray for Pepper.
Yes.
Pepper's been pretty sick a little bit, they've been in and out the hospital. So y'all continue to pray for him and keep him in your prayers. And I'd like to make that motion on the honor of Pepper Bray today.
Second.
So moved.
Motion is second. Council, please vote.
And the vote is unanimous.
No further business. Meeting's adjourned.
First one.